It is Sunday, the 22nd of April, 2018. I'm in front of the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and let's just lay down 3 chalk slogans saying Unitarian child abuse sucks. We happen to be heading towards the end of Child Abuse Prevention Month, and so I decided to keep the emphasis on the protests in April on Unitarian child abuse, more specifically Unitarian Universalist child sex abuse, and Unitarian Universalist cover-up and denial of child sex abuse, which obviously does include pedophilia, which is sort of a word to describe at least attraction to children, sexual attraction to children, and that may in and of itself not be sexual abuse of children if the pedophiles in question don't actually act upon their desires, but it becomes child sex abuse when a pedophile molests a child. But we're going to address all forms of child abuse, because not all child abuse is sexual abuse. There's non-sexual forms of child abuse as well, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, and so on. So, I've certainly been speaking out against sexual abuse of children by Unitarian Universalist ministers and Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers, etc. And I've also been speaking out against the utterly shameful cover-up and denial of child sex abuse by Unitarian Universalist Association leaders like former UUA President Reverend Dr. Peter Morales, former UUA moderator James See No Evil Key, also known as Jim Key, Kathleen K. Montgomery, who was the Executive Vice President of the Unitarian Universalist Association for 3 decades, and in that time she certainly helped to try and cover up and minimize child sex abuse committed by Unitarian Universalist clergy, to say nothing of other sexual misconduct committed by Unitarian Universalist clergy for 3 decades, even more than 3 decades. Kay Montgomery, who was part of her job description was to coordinate the work of the attorneys of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Well, she used various legal means, such as non-disclosure agreements, confidentiality agreements, various kinds of legal bullying, to try and silence complainants, people who complained about clergy misconduct of all kinds. So you can be sure that part of that included trying to cover up sexual abuse of children by Unitarian Universalist ministers. Even after Unitarian Universalist ministers were charged, tried, and convicted of sexual abuse of children, Kathleen K. Montgomery, and indeed Reverend Dr. Peter Morales, and indeed UUA moderator Jim Key still try to keep child sex abuse hidden from the public as much as possible, and that is made blatantly obvious by the fact that Kathleen K. Montgomery and UUA President Peter Morales thought it'd be a really good idea to instruct the Unitarian Universalist Association's Canadian attorney, Maître Marc-André Coulombe, to accuse me of the criminal act of blasphemous libel for allegedly making unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, when in fact my allegations about Unitarian Universalist ministers, to say nothing of Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers engaging in pedophilia and or rape, were by no means unfounded. They were very truthful blog posts that were solidly founded on publicly available information, specifically, amongst other things, newspaper reports about the fact that Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell had been charged, tried, and convicted of the forcible rape and indeed the unnatural rape, I'll leave it to your imagination to figure out what that is, of teenage Tibetan refugees who he had lured away from their families in India with promises of a better life in America. And the UUA was also trying to intimidate me into taking down blog posts about Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein's First Parish Norwell parishioner, Richard Buell, who was also charged, tried, and convicted of the forcible rape of children. In this case, we're talking about preteen children, children who were no older than 12 years old at the times that the rapes took place, and could have been as young as 6 according to some estimates. Certainly somewhere between 9 and 12 years old when the rapes took place, when Richard Buell, parishioner of First Parish Norwell in Massachusetts, raped a female family member and a neighbor's daughter. And I do understand that because of the statute of limitations on such things, that it was not possible to bring charges against Richard Buell for earlier rapes of children, that there was only a few cases where it was possible still to bring charges against them because the statute of limitations had not expired. So there's 2 cases right there of rape and pedophilia where the Unitarian Universalist Association tried to keep it hidden even after people had been charged, tried, and convicted and sentenced to jail terms. They wanted my blog posts to disappear because my blog posts made public what really wasn't available all that publicly. The newspaper reports that I'm talking about, for the most part, weren't online. They were accessible through newspaper databases and so on. There was, it's kind of interesting because when I first blogged about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell and Richard Buell in 2006, and I should say that I was talking about Mac Mitchell even earlier in other forums, but the Emerson Avenger blog only... he can just... So anyhow, the getting back to things, just letting these joggers go by, the information about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell simply was not very publicly available back in 2006. There was very little information available about him in terms of actual newspaper reports. I had been speaking about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell as a result of being made aware of the Mac Mitchell case by, even in the late 1990s, 1999 for sure, maybe 1998 in various other forums. I was actually permanently banned from all Unitarian Universalist Association sponsored email lists because I was asking hard questions about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell in the email lists. But anyway, getting back to things, so what happened is when I first blogged about Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell, there just wasn't very much information available about him in terms of actual newspaper reports. And a similar situation with Richard Buell, although there were a few. But then what happened is over the years, some of the newspaper reports, older ones, were actually archived and put online, and so they surfaced for a while. But then it seems that in even more recent years, they've gone underground again. They've basically been hidden, so one wonders about that. One wonders, how is it that these old newspaper reports, surface and are publicly available for maybe a year or 2 or 3, and then they're no longer available. What's the explanation for that? One has to wonder, in light of what the Unitarian Universalist Association tried to do with me, is if they don't actually send legal letters to, newspapers and so on, and demanding that they remove, blog posts and newspaper articles and so on. Anyhow, we will just continue to circulate here. I just want to make sure my camera's running here. Oh yeah, in 10 minutes into the protest. So my camera has been accidentally shutting off prematurely a few times, and so I just want to make sure it was still running. So like I said, it's the 22nd of April, and there's one more Sunday in April, so there's actually going to be 5, well there will have been 5 Sundays in April, between April 1st and April 29th, and I will have protested for 4 of them. I didn't protest on the 8th because I actually had an annual event or a biannual event that I like to attend, so I wasn't available here for the 8th because of this other event that I habitually attend, and therefore I couldn't be in 2 places at the same time. But every other Sunday in April I've protested. In May I will be observing the 20th anniversary of the beginning of my protest. My protest began sometime in May, possibly mid to late April of 1998, but to the best of my recollection, and I don't remember the exact first date of my protest, it was May of 1998. And you know, quite soon after beginning my protest, there was an article about it in the Montreal Mirror in early June. So it actually got a little bit of press very, you know, early in the protest. If I remember correctly, there was also a CTV news report one Sunday, and you know, there were other reports in other media at the time, or sometime later. The Suburban ran some stories. Jim Duff, the CJD talk show guy, did a show or 2, and then later when he was the editor of the Suburban, he ran some follow-up stories and so on. Jim Duff did a reasonably good job of covering the story, which is more than can be said for today's media, which seems to be basically incredibly complacent and unconcerned about such things. But also we have to factor in that Sue Montgomery, Montreal Unitarian, who was for a long time the Gazette's justice reporter, has a certain amount of influence within the media community, as do other Montreal Unitarians who were Gazette employees and so on. For instance, Mark Abley, Harvey Shepard, Nancy Lorimer. There's 3 right there. So what I'm getting at is Sue Montgomery in particular, but also other Montreal Unitarians. You know, they have influence within the media. They can sow disinformation, and they can dissuade Montreal journalists from reporting. And I actually have now, I've got evidence, clear evidence, that Sue Montgomery has in fact done that. So there's really no question now that Sue Montgomery has used her influence not only within the Gazette itself, but in the larger journalistic community of Montreal to spread misinformation and lies to try and persuade Montreal journalists, well, you know, there's no Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse, there's no sex crimes committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers and so on, there's no cover-up and so on, and so she has basically told this to various Montreal journalists, and they've bought her bullshit, unfortunately. They haven't done responsible fact-checking to determine, well, they've been fed a line of bullshit by Sue Montgomery. In fact, on the 19th of January, when I exited the courtroom after my first court appearance as a result of being accused of criminal harassment by Sue Montgomery, Stéphane Giroux of CTV News was there with a cameraman. He was there to interview me. And it was quite interesting because Stefan, one of the first things he said to me, and it was more of a question, I mean more of a statement than a question, was, do you get the message to leave Sue Montgomery alone? Like he actually quite aggressively said that. You know, do you get the message to leave Sue alone? I don't think he actually, if I remember correctly, I don't think he actually said Sue Montgomery, he just said Sue. But we all knew who he was talking about. You know, he's basically like delivering a message, you know, like, leave Sue alone, you know, like. So anyhow, I responded to that by saying, well, no, actually, I didn't get that message. And then he told me that Sue Montgomery had told him that she'd, you know, done her own investigation of my claims about Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse and Unitarian Universalist cover-up and denial thereof, and had determined that, you know, there was nothing there, you know, that my claims were groundless. I can't remember his exact words, but that's essentially what he said, is that Sue Montgomery had told him that my claims about Unitarian Universalist clergy abuse and cover-up and denial of clergy abuse, you know, had virtually no foundation in fact, that they were groundless. My response to that was to tell Stéphane Giroux that if Sue Montgomery actually told you that she just totally discredited herself as an investigative journalist, you know, that in fact everything I'm saying was very truthful and supported by evidence. And I specifically told him to do his own research. In other words, do your own fact-checking. He did no such thing. He ran, well, not just him, but CTV Montreal News ran a piece, a video report, obviously. But they also, you know, in putting that video report on the internet, you know, there was some writing associated with that video news report, and it actually said in writing, no such crimes, let alone a cover-up, have been proven in court. This is a false statement. This is bullshit.